It can be just the greatest empowering instrument, or it can be just more rote if it's not done right. So I want to have that conversation. I've said I want to be a president who brings everybody together around public education, which I still see as critical to the kind of country we are, the democracy we have. And if you really look at it, despite all of our questions about our own public education, we still turn out more creative people, more entrepreneurial people, more people willing to take risks and to do the best they can to forge their own future. So how do we do that on a broader scale, and how do we maintain our education system as a learning organism itself? And we look at the research, what works and what doesn't work, and how we bring that to bear. So I'm very excited about trying to figure out how we answer your question. Yeah.
Joe DePalma. I'm father of two, small business owner. About a year and a half out the gates at my company. My wife is full-time, works full-time for a large government contracting agency. And if anybody knows, I mean, I'm not a mom, obviously. When a mom goes back to work, the hardest part of like getting back to the job is, hey, I got to hand my child over to, whether it be an in-home care or a daycare. We've had experience with both. But essentially, she banked sick leave, she banked, vacation time. They gave maybe 3 weeks off or something like that, and then she did paid disability, so she could get the 3 months because we felt 3 months home with a child, that's the least we could do. So that was really tough. Now I'm a small business owner. And when I say small, really small, there's 7 of us in house, and we have 3 part-time employees. One's a mother, and she works part-time because she wants to be mom. She wants to be mom half the time and work from home and be with her kids. It's funny how you say entrepreneurs and starting a small business and the next generation of that. And my business partner and I feel like we're a part of that, but we had to you sit down and you go, all right, now we're going to hire employees. What do we do when one of our employees has a child? Because in my experience it was, man, my wife really had to grind to get 3 months. What do we do? And it was kind of, and I'll be 100% honest, it was, well, I guess we'll cross that path when it comes, because he's about to have his first child, so he doesn't quite know what we went through getting that 3 months, and how important it was for, and that's my wife needed more time than that. 3 months is a small window. Right. I'm not encouraging just 3 months, by any means. We want more than that, but. You brought up a good point. How does that look to the employer? Well, I know it doesn't look bad. I'm a father. I know what it means. But for these larger companies, for mothers that want to, I want 6 months with my kid, and I want to have a job when I get back, and I want to get paid for that. And I've been here and I've paid my dues, and I'm an asset to this company. Those should be expectations. So, for the small business. What are those incentives so that, my partner Brian and I come to the table and we're not like, whoa, what do we do? Right. There's nothing out there that we know that, hey, we can guarantee this. We're going to be able to stay in business without, at 7, 10 people, that person is an asset. I'm here right now, and I'm missing work to be done. So, right. What are the plans for that, to encourage that and to encourage that leave, especially from a small business standpoint?
That's really a great question, because anytime we start talking about leave, either the unpaid family and medical leave, which has now been in effect since 1994, signed in 1993 by my husband, it has been out there, and it's been taken advantage of something like 220 million times. But it's unpaid, and the only requirement is for employee base of 50 or more. So small businesses were basically not covered because nobody could figure out how you deal with the reality of a 7 to 10 person small business, and somebody is out. Even if you're not paying that person, how does that fit? So what's happening now is that we're all looking at paid family leave, but trying to figure out how it doesn't impose an unacceptable burden on small businesses. Because California's had paid leave for how long, Ann? Over 10 years. And they now have expanded it to cover more employees. And they've done a lot of research, and it hasn't cost jobs, it hasn't been disruptive. in part because, as you said at the end, people who are given this sort of help are really loyal. I mean, if you look at people who are treated with that level of respect and understanding, I mean, they'll come back. A lot of them will continue to check in and do work even when they're allegedly on leave. And if you look at some of the data we have, letting somebody go because they want to take care of their newborn baby or their adopted baby or their spouse has a medical emergency or their mother or father or some other older relative does, letting that person go and then retraining somebody for that job is actually a net loser. So there's a lot to argue for trying to figure out how we make this work. And so I've been, working with a lot of the people who are in this field to say, okay, if we have paid family leave, how do we factor in the very real differences between small businesses and others? And that's one of the things I'm most focused on. My dad was a small businessman. I mean, much smaller than you, but I mean, it made a good living for us, and he liked the independence and all the rest of it. So I'm particularly sensitive to small businesses. So what we're working on, learning from the California experience and learning from New York just passed a law and some other places are, how do we deal with the special challenges facing small businesses? So I'm very conscious of that. And I want to say another thing, too, which is what you alluded to about your wife. I just personally believe it's really, really important to give new mothers leave, paid leave, because if they don't get paid leave, a lot of the ones who need it the most can't exercise it. And a lot of low-wage women, workers, they're lucky if they get 2 or 3 days out. I remember I was in the hospital with Chelsea when she had Charlotte a year ago, September, and I was talking to the nurses there, and I said, so, what are some of the issues you're seeing coming through the hospital? And one nurse said, she said, it just breaks my heart, because when you're talking to these new young mothers and they have to go right back to work and they don't have any time at all, she said, you can just see how torn and upset they are. And so I think at least 3 months, I'd like to see more if it's possible, to bond with that baby, to get to know your baby, to have an idea of how to really be a mom. I mean, there are a lot of things I didn't know when I had Chelsea all those years ago. And, you can read all the books in the world, but until you're responsible, it's just hard to know how you're going to react and what you need to understand and have the support you need. So I'm a very strong believer in trying to provide that time, and I think it's both a social and an economic good, because a lot of moms will leave their jobs if they are financially able, even at the margin, because they just can't leave their baby so early, and then the employer is left with somebody, a vacancy that they got to figure out how to fill. So we're really looking hard at how we do that and how we construct a payment for it that is not burdensome on small businesses in particular.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
So my name's Tina Yoon, and I have 2 children, 14-year-old son and an 11-year-old daughter. And I just want to piggyback off of what this gentleman had brought up, which is a related issue of what happens to women's wages as well as a result of taking the time off.
Right.
And I'm just wondering what sorts of efforts we can make to help equal that pay gap, but then also for those women of color too. I think we get affected disproportionately more. So.
I agree completely with what you said, and the evidence supports it.
Right.
I've been on the equal pay bandwagon for a long time, and I feel so strongly about this because it's not just a woman's issue, it's a family issue, and it's an economic issue. About 2 weeks ago, I was in Pennsylvania at an event like this talking about some of these family-related concerns, and Lily Ledbetter was with me. And Lily Ledbetter, as many of you know, worked in a factory in Alabama and did not know she wasn't being paid equally, even though she was doing a job that was well-defined. She was a supervisor, and she was the only woman supervisor, and she didn't know that until she learned it by accident, and it was too late for her to get back pay and the like. But she made a point that isn't made often enough. She was paid 40% less for doing the exact same job. So that means her Social Security payment is 40% less.
Right.
The contributions to her 401k are 40% less. So I make the point that if you have a mother, a wife, a sister, or a daughter who's working, it affects you. It's not somebody else's problem. So what are we going to do about it? Because it's against the law not to provide equal pay, but there are a couple of problems in trying to figure out how we actually make that a reality. One is we don't have enough information. There's not enough transparency in private sector payments. And in fact, it is still acceptable, even legal, for people to be fired or otherwise retaliated against if they try to find out where their pay is compared to their coworkers. And we have to end that. That's what the Paycheck Fairness Act is about, something that I sponsored when I was in the Senate and that I'm determined we're going to get passed. So there's trying to create legal support for actually finding out whether you're being paid fairly, because a lot of people don't know. Secondly, the big answer to this is people in the workforce say, well, you know, women's lives are different, and they take time off when they have a newborn, or, you know, they may take time out of the workforce when their children are little. But really, if you hold constant for all those different factors, there still is a range of discrimination that is hard to explain or justify by any other explanation. So what I'm calling on, and I really applaud the Obama administration for starting this, they've been challenging companies. Because if you work for the government or if you are working under a union contract, you're in the military, you can find out what everybody's pay is. So there's enough transparency for you to know where you are and where everybody else is. But in the private sector, because there is no requirement yet for transparency, a lot of employers will tell you, and they are very sincere in telling you this, we do not have any difference. So what the Obama administration did was to say to some big companies, some big tech companies, why don't you really examine the data? And I give a couple of them credit. Intel did this, Salesforce did this. And I know the CEO of Salesforce, and he told me, he said, when the administration challenged companies, I said, sure, because I was sure we had the best record ever. And he said, then we began looking at the data. We were discriminating. Women with the same education, the same experience, the same time in the workforce were being paid less than men in comparable positions. And they immediately remedied that, but they would have never looked unless they'd been challenged. So I think part of what we have to do is get the laws updated, get more companies to look at themselves, and to keep the drumbeat going about how unfair this is, not just in the immediate pay, but all the way down the line in terms of women's economic well-being. And we just can't let people claim that it's not a real issue because, you know, there's a lot of blowback. I raise it all the time, and you know, I'm accused of playing the gender card and all of that. And the fact is that it's a real problem, and we can't let it go, and we have to be tenacious about it, and that's what it will take all of us to do. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Kelly Burke. I'm the vice mayor of the town and a recently retired teacher, so thank you very much for your time on public schools. But my question has to do with, before I came here today, I was on the picket lines with the Verizon workers. And a gentleman was telling me that he has a special needs child that has lots of problems, hospital expenses, and they have cut their health insurance. And he has no alternative but to go on COBRA, which he's not being paid, so he can't go on COBRA. And the union's trying to help, but they see it as this is a huge step to try to do away with the union.
Yeah.
What if not if, when you're president, what do you do to stop that, to stem that? Because all these things we've talked about, if we were union workers, things could be much better because the unions would be working for us.
Well, I want to, number one, make the case, because we do have so many independent workers now. We have people who may not have either direct experience or a real appreciation for the historic role that unions played in lifting people into the middle class. And so a lot of the workforce today, which is, you know, in more entrepreneurial, more independently directed work, is either indifferent